Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Well, we bit that apple and the garden was lost, and so we had to work.
Yeah, baby, we bit the apple and the garden was lost. That's the wonderful Dar Williams singing with Pete Seeger, as always, and David Burns, who wrote the words to that song, except for the big one, Solartopia. I wrote that. I'm Harvey Sluggo Wasserman, back with you for another hour here at PRN on the Green Power and Wellness Show. We have an action-packed show today. We're going to talk about election protection, especially in North Carolina and in Ohio. I do want to put out the idea. You know, we've had these massive demonstrations, unprecedented in world history, actually. Our cities all over the world protesting the death in Minneapolis that was absolutely avoidable, and all the other horrendous things that Black people face in America. We want to think about converting this huge protest movement to an election protection movement. Because, you know, in the past, we've had movements like Occupy and others that have just kind of faded away. We can't have this movement faded away. We've got all these kids out in the streets. They behave themselves beautifully. You know, we've had looters. Those are Trump people. We've had Nazis come out. Those are Trump people. But the demonstrators, they've been fantastic. And we can't let this go by. We got to put forward to the people who've been demonstrating. If you've been out demonstrating, it's time now to get involved with election protection. And we will talk about that in a few minutes. I will give you numbers. We do have a Monday call every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern time to talk about election protection. We have some of our veterans on. Bob Phillips is with us, and Joel Siegel, and we'll be talking with you guys in a few minutes. First, we have Mark Karlin, the editor, publisher, and founder of BuzzFlash.com. Mark, you've been running my pieces. We got one up there now on Trump's people going to be coming out to intimidate people at the polls. But you and I were talking about this bizarre and unnamed force that he marched across the street with to hold his Bible. I mean, I looked at that. That was one of the most nauseating performances I've ever seen of Donald Trump standing in front of a church, boarded up, holding a Bible, not reading it, not saying anything. I mean, you know, aside from the fact that he looks like Herman Goering, there's nothing, to comment on about that. Tell us, Mark, what you know about the military force that he used to walk from the White House to that church.
Well, first of all, this was a fascistic attempt to use the word he uses, and he used in a phone call with the governors on Monday, is to dominate. That is how he sees his governance as an authoritarian. Clearly, this photo op wasn't necessary. I don't think it really had much meaning even to his evangelicals. What he was doing with Bill Barr was asserting his ability to assume control and seize more power. And he walked amidst the failings of law enforcement officials from the White House across the street to Lafayette Square, where the church was or is.
Well, who were these people he marched with? That's the question. Is this a homemade personal Gestapo that he has set up? I mean, that's what
I think that's a very important question. And the first response to that and most important issue is that the DC police force would not go along with this action. They did not participate in the clearing, the very brutal clearing of the peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square. Mayor Bowser of Washington, and the police said this is not a police action. It seems to be a federal action. The people who were part of that federal action was really most of federal law enforcement, everything from the FBI to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the National Park Service, police, and as you mentioned, there is a group that's being talked a lot about on Twitter, and there's photos, and on the internet in general, who were little green men. They had no badges. They had no patches that indicate what service they were with. And when reporters approached them and asked them what branch of law enforcement are they said, we can't say. When they asked them what their name was, they said, we can't say. And I think this is Bill Barr and Donald Trump's brown shirts, basically. There is some speculation that they were actually members of the Federal Bureau of Prisons law enforcement, and they were brought in by Bill Barr. The speculation is because they're particularly brutal in putting down uprisings in prisons. And that's basically how Trump and Barr see peaceful protesting.
So you're saying that the guy who's I never call him the President of the United States, the guy who's in the White House has now assembled a personal police force, a fascistic personal guard, accountable to no one, extremely violent as they were to the protesters. And we can't find out who they are?
That is right. I mean, the White House is in its very authoritarian way, along with Bill Barr, who ultimately called the time that the troops attacked the peaceful protesters. But there's even more, Harvey. First of all, there are actually military troops who have been sent to Washington. I do not believe they have been deployed yet, but they're in wait in case the law enforcement officials gin up enough violence that they are to be called in. They were supposed to be sent back today, but Defense Department Secretary Mike Esper met with Trump, who's probably not very happy with him because Esper said that the Insurrection Act should not be invoked. But he decided under Trump's so-called badgering to keep the troops there. It's not that many, it's a few hundred, but it is military deployment. On top of that, Trump has asked governors who are Trumpsters, like Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp, to send National Guard troops to Washington from other states.
Trump has asked the governor of Florida to send National Guard troops to Washington?
Yes, and DeSantis is doing that. So what you really have here is a fascistic law enforcement force that represents the interest of one person, Donald Trump, and is used in this case against totally peaceful protesters. The media gets very confused, I think, sometimes between the looting element and peaceful protesting.
That's purposeful. I mean, we know we have three basic elements in the streets now. We've got the peaceful protesters who've been spectacular. We have the looters, who are basically street gangs and organized crime. There's been a lot of observation, hearsay supposedly, but of people showing up in unmarked cars, smashing into these stores, taking stuff, no connection whatsoever to the protests. And then, of course, we've got the neo-Nazis running around with guns. But,
in fact, Harvey, I would suggest that I would suggest that the focus that has been put by the police brutality in many, many, many cities against peaceful protesters has allowed the looting to thrive. If they were really police concerned about criminal activity, you would think they would concentrate on the looting. But instead, they're shooting rubber bullets, tear gas, batoning. There's still, after the George Floyd incident, reports and actually video of police officers putting their knee on protesters' necks. And this is of utmost concern because Trump likes to test market things. And what he basically is doing here is test marketing full fascism, that he has a assembled group of federal agents. And again, remember, the DC police force did not take part in this, who are at his beck and call, and who he could utilize in a situation like this to violently disperse and probably cause physical harm to peaceful protesters for something that was so obviously ginned up to be a so-called photo op. All he did was hold the Bible. So the symbolic importance of this to Trump was he was showing that he could dominate, that he can be a dictator and get away with it, which he did. Now, I add one other thing, because you were asking a lot about the, who are these, if they're not the DC police and these little green men who are identified. Shortly in the morning of Monday, Bill Barr asked the mayor of Washington to put the Washington, D.C. police under control of the federal government. And she turned him down. She said, I'll take you to court. And so he backed off there.
Wow. Mark Karlin, thank you so much. You're the editor, publisher, founder of BuzzFlash.com. You've done a lot of research on this. This is pure fascism we're looking at. It's not abstract. You got a guy in the White House who's condoning pulling together a private police force. They did serious violence to a nonviolent protest over the objections of the Washington, D.C. police force. I mean, this is fascism, pure and simple. And of course, a lot of the police out there have been attacking journalists. This is Germany, 1933. We are looking down the barrel of the gun. Does any of our guests want to ask Mark anything before we move into the issues of election protection?
I'd like to add one thing.
Please.
You made reference to 1933. Of course, there was the infamous Reichstag fire, which Hitler used as an excuse to receive constitutional authority in Germany to assume the powers of a dictator. And Trump, I think, knows how to take advantage of chaos. He welcomes chaos because he can do so many things while the press is preoccupied with the chaos. For instance, there's no longer any serious discussion of mitigating or containing the coronavirus. But the thing I wanted to transition to, which is what you're going to be talking about in your show, is that this is just further indication that he will have no compunction about trying to steal the 2020 election in any way that he can. And that the Democrats thus far have been toothless in trying to oppose that effort. But he will have no scruples, nor will his minions in the red states or in the Senate to commit criminal activity to suppress the vote, purge the vote, and suppress the vote through a variety of means, including
outright violence. Okay.
Outright.
So the piece I have posted with you is warning people that buzzflash.com, it originated at Reader Supported News. It's there too, about the paramilitary operation that we can expect on election day, with the Republicans, the Trump Republicans, putting out $20 million and recruiting 50,000 basically vigilantes. And we have a long history in this country of the Ku Klux Klan showing up at the polls and physically intimidating people who want to vote. That's one of the reasons vote by mail is so crucial, and that's why I've got Jennifer and Colette and Bob on with us to talk about what we're going to deal with in North Carolina, which has been a center of Klan activity, especially at elections. There was in 1898 a terrible riot. It wasn't a riot, it was an assault, fascist assault, Joel, I'll get you in a sec, on the people of Wilmington, North Carolina, that overthrew a biracial government in 1898. Hundreds of people were killed. And so North Carolina has a long history about this. Joel Siegel, I'm so glad I can see you as opposed to guessing that you want to be on. What's up?
You look very clean shaven. First of all, everything that Mark Karlin just said was right on. We really have a special guest who has to unfortunately leave, but Charles Stevenson was Congressman Ron Dellum's senior legislative assistant for so many years. He's now in North Carolina, and a very important progressive voice within the North Carolina Democratic Party. But I was wondering if he would have some time to say a few things before
I don't see him on. Charles Stevenson, are you on? Joel, I don't think he's called in. If you can check with him. I don't see him on the guest list, and he may be on the phone, but he should have got a Zoom.
Oh, okay.
So I don't see Charles Stevenson on, but when he comes on, we'll have him. What I have now, Mark Karlin now is very important, hair raising, and I'm sure everybody on the call and listening to the show is utterly terrified, which is the point. I mean, we need people out in the streets, and especially on election day, we're going to have to protect those people from at the polls. We're going to have to get the votes in, and we're going to have to make sure they're counted. Now, one of the great things that's happening with us in North Carolina is with Joel's leadership and Jennifer, Colette, and Bob. Bob PHIILIPS. We are putting together the first statewide network to protect the vote, and with a very specific agenda on doing that. Colette, you are on our Zoom call on Monday, and you are working with Jennifer, Bob, and Joel to take the lead in setting up a network in North Carolina. Can you tell us about what you're doing?
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me on this afternoon. It was a couple of minutes late. We actually had that moment of silence for the 8 minutes and 46 seconds to recognize George Floyd and how many minutes, how much time it took for him to pretty much just die at the hands of police brutality. But at any rate, here in Mecklenburg County, which is for those listening that may not understand county associations, we're right outside of Charlotte. Charlotte is our largest city and town within the county. We have 8 different townships here. I'm the president of the African American Caucus here for the Mecklenburg County Democratic Party. And what we've seen as far as voter participation has been extremely low. For the past 2 election cycles, I'm not sure how much voter suppression has played a part, as much as people just not going out to vote. Now we're going to get to a situation where voter suppression is extremely important, because I do believe we will have an influx of activity out at the polls here in November. We're doing everything that we can within the caucus to start to teach people from party level of government all the way up to the presidency on what their importance is and what the importance and power behind their votes are, and actually tying in, these are your people that you have elected so far. Do we keep them? These are the people that are supposed to be doing for you. This is what people are supposed to be doing for you in city government, in your county commission, for your judicial branches, your Supreme Court, your Superior Court, your District Court. All of these things are connected. And I don't think that we have made that clear for people. As for the people that say it's not my vote is not important. So we're trying to mitigate and completely eradicate actually that notion. And that's what we're doing we're doing education mainly to push people to the polls and to get people more informed about what's affecting them right in their backyards.
Well, you know, we've had this tremendous upwelling, beautiful, massive national protest. The question is, can we get these mostly young people to segue in and do the three things that need to be done to protect this election, which is to get to the voter rolls and get people re-registered. When they've been stripped, Greg Palast has estimated that 16 million people have been stripped from the voter rolls already. And we had Andrea Miller on our Zoom call to discuss how to do that. And we can certainly send people to Andrea's organization, but she's not in all the states. Mm-hmm. And then we have the vote by mail, which has to be made work. Obviously, vote by mail is extremely demanding and complicated. And then we've got to deal with the vote count and make sure that is done properly. So if we can get these millions of people who are out in the streets to segue over to that, that would be great. Jennifer and you and Bob, and we're now joined by Charles Stevenson. Charles, can you join in with us? Charles Stevenson, can I hear you?
Yeah, hey, how are you guys doing?
We're doing well. How are you? So we were talking here. We've got Jennifer Roberts, Bob Phillips, Joel Siegel, Colette Alston, and I'm Harvey Wasserman. And we got Mark Karlin from BuzzFlash. We're talking about how to segue over from these huge protests into election protection. As of today, we have less than 5 months till the election. So you're there in the critical state of North Carolina. What do you think we need to do?
Well, I mean, the first thing we're doing is having this conversation today, Harvey, and I think we got to continue talking. But in terms of planning, and in North Carolina, I guess Joel told you I've been pretty active with the Democratic Party here and trying to whip them into order. Harvey, look, right now we have to work with every organization, every person that wants to move this country to the next level, and we have to do it yesterday. So I am ready. I am ready to move this mountain. I'm sure you said this, and I've heard your guests speak on numerous occasions before. This time is not like any other time that we lived through. I had a call from my son the other day, and he asked me, he said, "Dad, what's the difference between now and 68? And initially when I responded to him, Harvey, I said, well, not that much difference. You know, the issues are basically the same, blah, blah, blah. But then after I reflected, it's a massive difference. If you look at the crowds that have assembled, I mean, demonstrations in every state in the United States, international. So again, you know, what we have to do here in North Carolina, Joel and I, is to work with these organizations. People want to move forward. They want to do something right now. We just give them the vehicle to make that happen. We have to change this country. There's just really no alternative right now. We have to change this country.
So the question then becomes, you know, Joel and I were born of the Hebrew persuasion here. And I've been thinking, you know, what's the difference between Nazi Germany and now? And for Black people, I mean, you are basically wearing the Star of David that the Jews wore in Nazi Germany. I mean, it must be very similar to be a Black person in the United States now to what it was to be a Jewish person in Germany in the 30s, don't you think?
Well, I mean, look, I could be, but I'm saying, man, it's much not different than being a slave in the 1500s or 1600s. I mean, right now, the way African Americans are treated in this country, the way we've been treated for the last 400 years, hasn't really changed. The knee on our neck has been on our neck for 400 years. And right now, it's time for us to stand up and say, you got to get that knee off our neck. And I think that's going to happen. So I think the analogy, yeah, the difference between, there's a similarities between the Jews in Germany and African Americans in the United States is very, very close. I mean, oppression is oppression. I mean, pain is pain. And we just have to move to alleviate that. Right now, I'm telling you, man, there are no alternatives. There are no alternatives. Right now, all we have to do is to do the work. And it's going to take a fusion. It's going to take a coalition of folk across all that, the things that used to divide us in terms of races and genders and religions. It's going to take everybody coming together. And so putting together a multiracial, multicultural coalition, I think, is really, really a necessary step. And so I want to work with you guys. And as I told Joel earlier today, I got another call at 4:30. That's why I couldn't hang around too tough. But I did want to take this opportunity to meet you guys, to let you guys know that I'm willing to ride with you. We have to do what we got to do. And again, it's going to take all of us, everybody stepping up across the boundaries and getting this done.
Well, for the next 5 months, and thank you, Charles, for joining us. We're honored. You're terrific. Joel's told me a lot about you. You're a tremendous organizer, and you're on with great people, with Bob Phillips and Jennifer Roberts and Colette ALSTON, Joel SEGAL, Mark Karlin. So we got a coalition right here. But for the next 5 months, it's all got to be about this election. I mean, you didn't hear Mark Karlin's description of the fascist Gestapo personal. You know, when Hitler took power, he made the Wehrmacht, the German army, swear a personal allegiance to him. The Wehrmacht in Germany was dedicated to Adolf Hitler, not to the German people. And this is the police force that Donald Trump has put together.
Well, he said the same thing. You're right.
We have
and
5
I did hear Mark.
months. We know what we need to do to protect this election, Charles, and we have 5 months to do it. So I know you got to go. We will be in touch with you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Please join our Monday election protection call, and we'll move ahead with that, all right? So we are focused now. Thank you, Charles. We're focused in North Carolina. Bob Phillips, you are at Common Cause in North Carolina, and you have, can you tell us what's going on with the legislation that's aimed at trying to preserve the election? And then we'll go to Jennifer Roberts, former mayor of Charlotte. Bob Phillips?
Sure, Harvey. And again, it's a great pleasure for me to be on with you and everybody else. And as particularly several North Carolinians here, the state Senate currently, in both chambers of the North Carolina General Assembly, are controlled by Republicans. But the Senate does have a bipartisan bill that would essentially help make vote by mail easier and also do some things to address what we fear is going to be a poll worker shortage crisis. We probably make voting by mail harder than just about any other state in America. We don't have a rich tradition of vote by mail. In the 2016 election, only 4%, about 20,000 of our 4.7 million votes cast in 2016 were vote by mail. The State Board of Elections director is predicting it could be as high as 40%. That would be 2 million people selecting a vote by mail ballot. We're very particularly interested, we're nonpartisan, but making sure that the education about how to vote by mail is particularly in the communities that are being hammered by the virus. In North Carolina, 22% of our population is African American, and yet they make up 38% of people testing positive for the COVID virus. These neighborhoods, again, are being hammered, and there's going to be, we fear, a lot of hesitation to cast an in-person ballot as normal. So we really do need to get that education to everyone, but particularly our vulnerable, underserved communities. So we're very hopeful that this bill will pass the state Senate next week and be signed into law by our Democratic governor.
Well, 40% is a lot, but that means 60% are still going to be coming to the polls. And also it's amazing, you know, North Carolina has one of those, you know, I'm trying to find the right word to describe these legislatures. In 2010, there was a red map coup, REDMAP coup, sponsored by the Koch brothers. And this is one of the major events in American history, right under the radar. Obama, apparently, the Democratic Party apparently had no consciousness this was being done. But they used Koch brother money and the American Legislative Executive Council, or whatever they call themselves, they targeted districts. What? Alec, yeah, and they targeted districts, and they took over state legislatures, and one of them was gerrymandered, and one of them was North Carolina, and North Carolina has been absolutely ferocious in abusing the right to vote. I mean, it's just been mind-boggling what they've been willing to do. I mean, the miracle now is you do have a Democratic governor, so you have a bipartisan state. What do you think the chances are you're going to get this legislation passed?
I think it's very strong. I do think the Republicans, the majority party, and they have been in power for the last 10 years, understand that we need the money that was allocated in the Federal CARES Act and then the Help America Vote Act. And they probably recognize there's an urban-rural divide here in North Carolina, that their voters in some of these rural counties are going to need also the vote by mail option is what I think is driving them. There's also litigation that has been filed that could also be pressuring them. We really have been, Harvey, as you've mentioned, sort of the basket case for bad democracy in the last decade, being number one in voter suppression, being number one in racial and partisan gerrymandering. And it's really been the litigation, the courts that have helped kind of save us. But just to give you context, and I think you and certainly everybody on this call knows, we're a battleground state. And we also have a hotly contested governor, U.S. Senate, all 13 members of Congress, obviously, up for grabs. But what we also have, for the first time in more than a decade, the control of the North Carolina General Assembly is also up for grabs. In this all-important year, when whoever wins will obviously be able to draw the maps in 2020, or 2022, I should say. And we support redistricting reform. If the Democrats were to flip and gain power, we would want them to do the right thing. But it's an enormously important election everywhere, but particularly here in North Carolina. And certainly we are all about, like Colette says, like I know Jennifer will say, and Joel, we've got to get people to vote. We've got to get everybody, as many people out there as we can, to vote.
Right. So, but what we're arguing now, and I'll go to Jennifer in a sec, is that, and you are the first, what looks like the first statewide network. We have to have people in every precinct, although precincts are, in flux, in every county election board and statewide to know 100% exactly what's going on here, because it's, there are complications with the registration rolls, there are complications with vote by mail, and certainly complications with counting the vote. We do have John Brake, he's not on today, but we have some people who understand the back end of this with the machines. But every piece of this puzzle is going to require serious person power to make the right thing happen. Jennifer Roberts, you're there in Charlotte. I can see the city in the background. I think is that Charlotte?
That is our skyline right there behind me. Yes.
So you are the former mayor of Charlotte. What are we looking at to get a statewide network going so we can have a template to show other states what to do?
Well, it's interesting in this time of COVID, there are so many issues that come to the fore. And one of them that I have continued to think about is the fact that there are many people who don't have internet access. And so we need to have volunteers in rural areas who can make phone calls. I know that the Democrat Party has a concerted effort to call people and remind them this is a really important election and their vote does count. I've talked to people, and gerrymandering is a big form of voter suppression. And there are people who are in gerrymandered districts who think that, their vote for local officials doesn't matter because they're in a heavily Republican district or a heavily Democratic district and they're the other party. So we have to work very hard to get information to people who aren't on the internet, who may not get the newspaper. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the census. This is a census year, which is incredibly important for how resources get allocated. And I remember very distinctly in 2010, when our voter rolls dropped from 2008, the amazing turnout from the Obama election, to 2010, our voter rolls dropped by 1.5 million people. We went from 4.5 million people voting to 3 million in 2 years. And that's when Alec had the concerted effort to take over state legislatures. And that's what happened to ours. That is just one example of how important. So what happened in North Carolina? We didn't expand Medicaid. We actually cut unemployment benefits by the amount and by the length of time you could receive them. So, plus many, many more atrocities that have happened to the people of North Carolina in the last 10 years. So it's up to us as active citizens, as members of political parties, as members of nonprofits who understand how civics works. It's up to us to really build that network. And we are working on that. I've gotten phone calls. I've been on the phone making phone calls. But that's how you do it now, because you can't really canvass. People are not opening their doors because they're afraid of the virus. And so we have got to get a lot of folks. And the other thing that Bob mentioned about poll workers, again, most of our poll workers are elderly, who are ones more susceptible to the virus being lethal. And so there's concern that they're not going to have people signing up to work the polls, which would mean shutting down polls, and we do not want a repeat of Wisconsin. So we've got all hands on deck. Bob and Common Cause do a great job. COLLETTE ALSTON does a great job with the African American caucus here in Mecklenburg, and we're connecting with other groups. We're connecting with the state party and nonprofits. Democracy North Carolina is another one that's done a great job, because the other thing that's happened is that we've gone back and forth on voter ID in this state, and so people don't know whether they need an ID or not. But we've got vote writers on the ground here, and their express purpose is to help people get the documents they need to vote. So if people don't know if they need an ID, they're going to at some point, probably likely. We want to make sure that they're getting those IDs. So there's just a bunch of issues all at once. But you know what? We are determined in North Carolina. We have seen the pain. We have seen the challenge. And I have every confidence we're going to get people out.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, it's really heartening, but boy, we certainly have challenges. I mean, I've been rooted in Ohio, and God, I can't even begin to tell you what they're doing there. I think you're in better shape in North Carolina in many ways than in Ohio. Did you want to say something, Collette?
No, I was saying wow, but to piggyback a little bit on Mayor Roberts' commentary, when we were talking about precincts, we have 195 precincts here in Mecklenburg County. Across the state of North Carolina is nearly 1,700. Of those precincts, as far as the African American community is concerned, I think it's about, my numbers are crazy, about close to 48% of the precincts that have a 30% plus or more Black presence aren't organized across the state of North Carolina. So we're working on that too. A lot of people don't even understand these election processes, the political process itself. Again, education is extremely key in getting people out to understand the importance of voting. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, it's huge. You know, I think one of the things that's going to happen is with vote by mail, and I think I'm one of the few that has this opinion, but I think vote by mail is really going to help us. Because first of all, the precincts, a lot of these precincts are going to go away. And you're going to, unfortunately, our experience in Ohio in the primary early in May or April, rather, was that they got rid of all the precincts. Then they had an election center that was stuck, you know, in an abandoned strip mall, for God's sakes. But they did have one. People were able to drive through. They're not going to, the demand for poll workers is going to be lower. Now, what we want to do, I think, is to go to these young demonstrators and say, hey, you were just out in the streets, they were gassing you, they were beating you up. This is a piece of cake. All you got to do is show up, you know, and wear a mask and be a poll worker. And there'll be many, you know, in 2018, there were 116,990 places to vote in this country. Precincts, I guess you would call them, right? Mm-hmm. In this coming election, there will be one per county, which is going to be about a little around 4,000. I think it's a little over 4,000 in the country. So you in Mecklenburg County, you will have one or two election centers, and that's a nightmare in a lot of ways, but it does relieve the need to have coverage of all the different precincts. That's the reality we're dealing with. So the demand for poll workers is going to be way down. If we can shift the demographic, I mean, you know, the poll workers are all over 70 now. If we can get it down to the younger people, and have them really know what's going on. And this is really important. Stick around for the vote count, because the vote count has got to be monitored. Joel, yes, Joel Siegel.
Yeah, first of all, Collette Alston has probably one of the best resources that I've seen, where she's going door to door with her team. She can't go door to door right now because of COVID-19, but
that's going to happen soon, I think.
It's like a 46, whatever, 40, 50, 70 page booklet that explains to the voter, where do you go vote, who's running? Because in Charlotte, when Jennifer was the mayor, that was actually quite different. Everybody knew there was an election because she did a good job on getting the PR and the media out. The current mayor, unfortunately, I don't feel like is doing that, but I'm not here to, cast any aspersions or blame on her. The problem is the Democratic Party, which I've worked with for 40 years, and also what was in leadership of when I was senior legislative assistant to John Conyers, in my opinion, they don't have a national strategy to do three things: register people to vote in the time of COVID, protect the people while they're voting, and count the votes accurately. So I've been on the phone with senior level officials of the Democratic Party, and I just got off the phone with Maya Rockamore Cummings, the wife of the late great Representative Cummings, who is the former chair of the Maryland Democratic Party. And and Jennifer Roberts and I have been talking. What we would like to do is get a senior level official of the Democratic Party, who happens to be very progressive, to have a meeting with every state chair and key local precinct captains who do all the work, and get a comprehensive plan before it is too late. This is going to be a wreck, okay? Yeah, Donald Trump is down in the polls. I get it. If we don't deal with voting by mail, if we don't deal with absentee ballots, if we don't do with a lot of the Democratic offices have closed down because of COVID-19. This is an absolute mess. This is more important than raising money to get TV commercials on. The Democratic National Committee, the DNC and the DCCC, don't have an infrastructure. That's the problem. That's what Collette is trying to do herself. And Common Cause, they don't have an infrastructure. This is a chance for them to reimagine the Democratic Party. They raise money for TV and radio ads. This is a huge mistake right now. So we are taking matters in our own hands. Let me close by saying, I don't believe in pointing the fingers and say, oh, it's Joe Biden's fault and it's Perez's fault. I don't believe in that. I believe in solving problems in a democracy. We have time to do it. This show is a great venue to start doing that. And in North Carolina, we just happen to have our game together, and we're going to lead this effort. So thank you.
Well, you're 100% right, Joel. You mentioned that you're expecting a 40% vote by mail. We should shoot for 90%. If we get an election that's 90% vote by mail, that will change everything. I got involved in this in 2004, because they stole the election in Ohio. And we were just going crazy. They did 100 different things. They won't be able to do that now. And what we've been asking for, the number one demand of the election protection movement for the last 20 years, since Florida 2000, has been paper ballots. Hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots. And vote by mail gives us that. We don't want to go on the internet. We want to have everybody get a ballot in the mail. And that, of course, Bob, with the legislation you're pushing, and Collette and Jennifer, that's what has to be protected. Above all, we have to make sure that people get a ballot. Now, this witness demand is really a pain. My understanding is there are only 2 other states in the country. Is that right, Bob?
Rhode Island, Alabama, and North Carolina. That's correct, Harvey.
You said on the other call that politically you won't be able to pull it off. It's tough. Okay, so we got to get a witness. That's tough. Play that song, Get Me a Witness, right? But there has to be an organization that guarantees the ballots are printed properly. And we've had a history of that. I can barely say this. In southwestern Ohio in 2004, the county boards that were controlled by Republicans sent out absentee ballots that did not have John Kerry's name on them. Oh, slight problem. So, in every county, and it's done county by county, every county, you're going to have to go in and proofread the ballots before they go out.
One thing, Harvey, and again, this is something Collette, Joel, and Jennifer would know. We have 100 counties here in North Carolina. The General Assembly is controlled by Republicans. That we do have a Democratic governor. And the good thing is, and again, I say this in a nonpartisan frame, our State Board of Elections is controlled by Democrats. The way the rule and law works in North Carolina is all the Board of Elections across all 100 counties are controlled by the party of the governor. So even the reddest counties in North Carolina are going to be controlled by a Democratic county Board of Elections. So that is one slight, I guess, silver lining, or, we can kind of have some hope that they will be doing the right thing. One point Joel made, and this is new for North Carolina, but we do finally have online voter registration. This is brand new for this election. We still need to improve it, but one of the things this law does that's now in the state Senate, it creates a portal that the State Board of Elections will run to help things like online voter registration, requesting an absentee ballot, being able to track where your ballot is once you've mailed it. Things that we've never had in North Carolina, but again, gets to the point that Collette has made, and that is we've got to have education just to make sure everybody understands how that works.
Well, once people can go door to door again, maybe people can go with laptops and get people registered online with a laptop. Is that possible, Jennifer? Can you admit, or Collette? Can you admit?
I was just going to say, we are actually doing that online without going door to door right now during this pandemic. So as we have Zoom calls and we're doing our voter education teach-ins, we actually have a link to the online registration where we can do all of that and share screens with Zoom. So
how about going into the churches on Sunday? I know that you can't do that in a synagogue on Saturday, right? You can't go into a shul with a laptop on Shabbos. But on Sunday, you could go to the churches with laptops and do that. Is that possible?
We could once the churches open back up, but right now we're not there. And a lot of our Black churches are not opening back up regardless of what our governor is saying we can or can't do to worship. So we're doing what we can and everything for the most part online. But all of this, what we're talking about, is doable online. We're doing it. So
wow. Well, it's miraculous. I mean, I have no doubt. I'm not in North Carolina, but I have no doubt that a fair popular election in 2020 will, in a nonpartisan way, protect us from a dictatorship. I'm worried. I'm worried about that period. If he loses the election between then and January 20th when he leaves, or January 4th, whatever it is, that to me is. But there's no doubt in my mind that the popular vote will go against a dictatorship. He has not helped himself. I mean, you can yell at Joe Biden for not campaigning, but Trump has done a miraculous job. You couldn't ask for a better performance from a guy who wants to be a dictator. But, Jennifer, what do you think? How about in Charlotte, where you were mayor? Are you going to be able to access people with the internet?
Well, it's interesting. We've had an effort even for school children to get on the internet. We have 20,000 households in Mecklenburg County that aren't connected. And that is a problem for remote learning for our students. And so it's, one more example of the disparities that we face. That is why we need to elect good people to help put money in the right places to eliminate some of these disparities that we're seeing. So, but we do have a very active party, and Collette's doing a great job, and the precinct chair is doing a great job of trying to reach some of those folks. Most people do have phones, and most have cell phones. And so, we're updating phone lists, et cetera. But it is, especially, it's not just Democrats, it's not just progressives. They're elderly folks who have a hard time accessing documents, who don't know how to download stuff from the internet, who don't know what the internet is. People in their 70s and 80s who vote every election, and they're very confused. They're confused about, whether they need an ID or not, how much is changing and all that. And so it's going to be important for us also to visit those residential centers or try to get information to them. A lot of the elderly centers, people are they're tight as a drum right now because they're very concerned about COVID. And so, we'll have some outreach there as well. That's important around the country, the elderly folks, and that's a bipartisan issue. We want our elderly residents to be able to vote safely. We want them to have clear information, and that is going to have to be an extra effort. I know the Democrat Party, we've got a lot of elderly folks who are volunteers who are very informed, and they do a great job. We need that to happen all over the country.
Well, Collette, we talked, and Jennifer, about a network of people around the state with people in each of the 100 counties. How doable is that?
I'm going to defer to Mayor Roberts first.
Well, I have not been talking to Eastern North Carolina. I will tell you something, though, that's pretty frightening. And that is, we saw a decline in turnout in 2016 because of hurricane activity. We've had a couple of hurricanes. Hurricane season started June 1. We've got predictions of more hurricanes. North Carolina has a coastline that's one of the most challenged coastlines in the country from climate change, from extreme weather, from sea level rise, and we've had massive flooding. Turnout in Eastern North Carolina has been depressed in those years of high flooding. They're rural areas, there are a lot of Democratic areas, and you can see it in the numbers. So again, another great reason that we're pushing for vote by mail, people to get prepared ahead of time, people not to have to worry about going to polls because you just don't know what Mother Nature's going to do. And again, another reason why it's so important for them to understand, to be prepared ahead of time, resilience in your voting as well as in, your city planning. And that's something that North Carolina and a lot of our coastal states are going to be looking at and dealing with.
Well, it's another reason to go vote by mail.
Yeah, that is a concern.
2 minutes. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Really quickly, there's a huge concern about, people being able to get to the polls for the weather, coastal, all of that great stuff. One thing that we're concerned with here, particularly in Mecklenburg County, is just getting people out, period. We have 800,000 registered voters. And when we are in elections and only 40,000 come out to vote, that is an absolute travesty. So we have a whole other underlying issue that we're having to fix and change, aside from anything else that may happen weather-wise. So I just want people to keep that in mind, that people aren't voting, even the people that can vote.
Well, hopefully vote by mail. You can get people a paper ballot. Bob Phillips, that's something hopefully Common Cause will be working on, I assume.
We will. And, the number one reason studies show why people don't vote is lack of information on when, where, who's running. We do, and Jennifer mentioned the good folks at Democracy North Carolina co-produce the state's most comprehensive and largest nonpartisan voter guide that has candidate information, has when, where to vote. We'll have your voter rights and the information about when we get this absentee by mail, vote by mail law passed. So that is one thing. We'll be mailing this out to more than 1 million people. It'll be online, ncvoterguide.org. And that's another tool for us to get the information, get the education to voters.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all. This has really been great. We're out of time. Joel Siegel, thank you. Contact me, Sluggo Wasserman, Solartopia@gmail.com. Join our Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern time Zoom gathering on the election rights. We'll have you represented in that call because this is critical what's going on in North Carolina. Seems to me the more I hear about it, the more it's got to be vote by mail. I mean, a vote by mail gets us around a hurricane. If we can get people a paper ballot in people's hands and get it back, there need to be drop boxes. We're not going to be able to rely on the Postal Service possibly. We do have an answer. The question is getting it done. In North Carolina, believe me, as you know well, is right in the eye of the hurricane. So thank you so much. Thank you, crew in New York. Thank you, Progressive Radio Network. This has been Harvey. So thank you, Mark Karlin. People go to buzzflash.com, see Mark's fabulous site. I do have a piece up there on the Standing Up to the Klan at the polls. Another reason, if there was ever a reason, an argument for vote by mail, it's the Ku Klux Klan, which is back and forth with the current administration. All right, everybody, thank you so much. See you next week.
Thank you, Harvey.
Power Wellness, and we'll see you on Monday's election protection call, 5 p.m. Eastern time. All right, take it away, Dara Williams and Pete. We'll see you next week in Solartopia on the Green Power and Wellness Show.
Solartopia, all over God's green world.
Will we multiply